Carmen Miranda is a circus, and I'll bet you that if today, the first time you saw her, she'd delight you.
Well, she was larger than life. She really was, because she had a tremendous personality, and you couldn't help but like her because she was very friendly.
Usually people will say, oh, she's the one who wore the fruit on her head.
Carmen Miranda was a tiny, effervescent, dazzling explosion of color and movement. Born in Portugal, moved to Brazil, and exemplifies everything that those of us in the northern part of America think is Latin American. She was the true exemplar of South America to people in the United States.
Carmen Miranda possibly was the first Brazilian artist who took Brazilian music internationally. She was a singer, performer of great energy, and created an image that is still with us today.
Carmen Miranda was a sassy, sensual señorita with flashing eyes and a tutti-frutti hat, who left a profound imprint on music, film, fashion, and the art of seduction.
In 1939, Lee Schubert, who co-ran with his brothers the Schubert Organization in New York, happened to be down in Rio de Janeiro and saw her perform and thought she'd be just the perfect thing to spark up a show he was planning to produce for Broadway called The Streets of Paris.
She was easy to put into that show because it was a review. It didn't have a storyline, so you could put anybody in there.
When Carmen Miranda arrives in New York in 1939, she is met by a swarm of publicity. When she gets off the boat, she doesn't know hardly any English, so she's asked people on the ship to give her a few phrases that she can say when she's met at the docks. And so she comes out with stream of consciousness words of English. So it's these little snippets of things, but she keeps repeating money, 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 which makes the reporters gawk for a brief, uncomfortable moment.
When she came here, she didn't speak English very well at all, but she was very bright and very determined to assimilate as quickly as she could.
She never gets past this moment in America where she is speaking her pidgin English in this first introduction to the press on the docks.
The United States, we were really unaware of all of the variations of culture and music and ethnicity and educational background of Central and South America. To us, it was all one big place.
We were a country that loved novelties. I think we still are. And there could be nothing more novel to a nation like ours that at that time paid very little attention to what happened below Texas. You know, we didn't pay much attention in those days to Mexico, Central America, or certainly South America. And here she was, this Brazilian, incredible, vivacious performer. And she appeared as a specialty in The Streets of Paris.
I got to know her, of course, being in the same show. It was a Broadway production of The Streets of Paris by the Schubert brothers at the Broadhurst Theatre on Broadway. And we, before she even arrived, were told about this fantastically exotic, wonderful performer. And she came in and didn't speak a word of English. And in the huge cast of The Streets of Paris, about 50, 60 people, there were only 3 people who spoke French, because Carmen spoke Portuguese and French. And because she couldn't communicate with anybody, she used me as a translator.
Even when they did the tryouts in Boston, the public was electrified. The audiences just couldn't believe what they were seeing.
We had just finished the act, and I was standing in the wings when she came out, and she was mesmerizing.
Opening night, none of them were prepared for it. The next night, everybody was there for it.
Her theme song was Ukia Baiana Tang. Ukia Baiana Tang. Stolarish Diodu Tang.
O que é que a baiana tem?
O que é que a baiana tem?
Tem touço de seda, tem. Tem brinco de ouro, tem. Colares de ouro, tem. Tem bata rendada, tem. Tem saia engomada, tem. Sandália enfeitada, tem. E tem graça como ninguém. O que é que a baiana tem? Como ela requebra bem. O que é que a baiana tem? Quando você se requebrar, caia por cima de mim, caia por cima de mim, caia por cima de mim.
And if you listen to the music, you hear her doing things with her voice that you will never hear in the 20th Century Fox musicals that she does, because her voice has yet to become Americanized.
She sang in Portuguese. She wore this very outlandish costume. Oh, I think she was just a wonderful performer.
Sandália enfeitada tem. E tem graça como ninguém.
Miranda appealed to everybody. Her type of act was unusual, it was sexy, it was provocative, it was inviting.
It's Carmen Miranda's image that graces the cover of the playbill. And the image that you see there of Carmen Miranda is not the image that we think of, the happy, smiling, wild-eyed image. In fact, the photograph they take of her with this imperious look on her face as she is looking down, you can't even see her eyes at all. She looks like some exotic princess from some exotic land. And this image of Carmen Miranda is going to quickly start disappearing.
At the time that she first, exploded on Broadway, I don't think New Yorkers knew what that was, other than it was bombastic and it was thrilling, and the words went by so fast and they didn't understand it and they didn't have to understand it. And look the way her hands moved and her hips moved, everything was going different directions. They were just overwhelmed by the sheer physicality and the joy, the sheer joy that she always did, singing and dancing. I don't think that many of them knew, oh, that's a samba step that she's doing.
She appeared only twice in the show, at the end of Act 1 and at the end of Act 2. And it became the talk of New York. And because national radio, network radio, favored her, she was suddenly the talk of the whole country.
Rudy, I sure like that rhythm. You're not the only one, Bill, who likes that rhythm. All Broadway started raving one night last week when Carmen Miranda introduced it at the opening of Streets of Paris.
Carmen Miranda. You know, that's all I've been hearing in New York for a week. Where does she come from, Rudy?
Senorita Miranda hails from Brazil, good old Brazil. She's just about the newest thing in the singing line that I've heard in a long time, although I have heard her records for many months.
Well, what does it mean?
I haven't been able to find out. I don't speak Portuguese, and the senorita doesn't speak English. But it doesn't make any difference what the words mean. When she gets through singing, you'll understand.
Carmen Miranda's voice was very dynamic. It was extremely energetic, and she had a very clear diction.
It was the songs, it was the costume. She was wearing a very special costume that became later her trademark, and the rapid diction and the mispronouncing of the few English words that were in one of her songs called The South American Way.
That this were a television program.
Following your eyes, Ben, and using a little perspicacity, would I be wrong in concluding that you mean Carmen Miranda?
Well, Leroy Miller, you certainly wouldn't be wrong. Girls like that should be seen as well as heard.
Ah, but come, Ben, don't indulge in trite nothings. You know, in reviewing Streets of Paris, the critics said that her personality is something in the order of electricity, that it reaches into the last rows of seats in peanut heaven.
If you touched her, you probably got a shock.
Well, it's lucky that Carmen Miranda doesn't understand English, or she'd be blushing herself right out of that coat of tan that she wears as we face her across this microphone.
She does not speak English well when she goes to the United States, but she certainly does understand a little bit, and she pretends not to understand and instead deliberately makes a lot of verbal errors and mispronunciations, and this is part of what makes her charming, and that's hugely successful. The audience in the United States reacts to this very favorably.
But there's no doubt about it, Leroy, the young lady is rather an eyeful. Ladies and gentlemen, looking into the future, it's easy to see her becoming one of the most popular stars of the iconoscope when television comes your way. In fact, senorita, that's my personal promise.
Your promise?
Mm-hmm.
She is good.
Oh, you ask whether my promise is good, eh?
Good.
Then you do understand English?
Oh, si, senor.
Yes?
I learned a little in South American.
You learned a little in South America.
South America. South America.
That's fine. Well,
The general impression was that nothing like her had ever been seen or experienced before. She was just a phenomenon.
And Van Heflin and Mickey Rooney would sit in a front row 6 nights continuously, they were watching her, they were in love with her.
Schubert had to be aware of that there was something there, something brand new that had not been seen before.
After Schubert realized what money-making machine he had in his hands, he began to license everything in earnest.
Certain department stores, they had these lines of Carmen Miranda products.
She even had a line of clothes at Saks Fifth Avenue. She did design jewelry and hats. I mean, that lady worked. She worked it.
Carmen Miranda's turbans, platform shoes, the heavy jewelry was being marketed throughout the country.
Schubert also was like Ziegfeld. When they would hire stars to perform in a show, oh, and by the way, you're also going to perform in a midnight performance at a nightclub and a da-da.
Well, they had quite a busy schedule. They had to run. The streets of Paris had 2 acts, and so they sang in the first act, left, went to the walls of Astoria to do their act, came back for the second act, and they left and went to the Versailles to do another act.
So the stories that her band tell about just singing, dancing, the curtain closes, get into a taxi and drive into the next place to perform. So she was seen all over New York and got incredible reviews.
Imogene Coca did a wonderful parody of Carmen Miranda only weeks after she had made her debut on Broadway.
Her appearance in Streets of Paris was so sensational that it was obvious that the movie studios would pounce on the opportunity to sign her, and 20th Century Fox moved quickly.
20th Century Fox, in the summer of 1939, begins trying to develop a film that will feature Carmen Miranda. And in fact, they entitled this, one of her big numbers from Streets of Paris, South American Way.
Schubert could not lose her, so the deal was struck that she would be filmed in New York on her time off, away from the show, before she did the show.
So it couldn't be a film with Carmen Miranda as, you know, top-billed star, because she couldn't do it. She didn't have time.
She was 3,000 miles away from Hollywood. She was in New York, appearing on Broadway. So what they did was to shoot all her musical numbers from Down Argentine Way while she was still running in the show, and shot them in New York.
This spot is the ultimate. Since Carmen Miranda came here, nobody can get in.
You're sure you can get us a table?
But absolutely. The head waiter is my ex-brother-in-law. Ever since my sister left him for Anastasia, he has been so grateful that he will do anything for me.
In the film, Betty Grable comes into a big nightclub, and there's a cut and there's a reverse shot, and there is Carmen Miranda, except it's been spliced in and it was actually filmed 3,000 miles away.
Carmen Miranda plays Carmen Miranda in Down Argentine Way, which is interesting that Fox would cast her exactly as she was.
I found extraordinary in Down Argentine Way that Carmen on the stage sings her sambas in a very quiet, relaxed, seductive way.
I think if you look at her sequences in Down Argentine Way, you get a very clear sense of how she performed before the studios began to create the image. After all, they hadn't very much time to do anything to alter her performing style after she was on the stage 8 times a week in the streets of Paris.
So it is very her. It's before, you know, Hollywood and Zanuck make her more exotic, more outrageous, more outlandish. So it's more, I think, what she brought to Hollywood.
Her singing in this film is unique in the whole production of Fox.
And then, of course, you know, Hollywood takes what she brings and exaggerates it. everything after Down Argentine Way gets more and more exaggerated with Carmen Miranda. And I'm not just talking about clothes. You take a look at her eyebrows, you take a look at her eyelashes, you take a look at her, the lipstick on her lips.
I think we remember the crazy hats that she wore and the jewels and the color and all of that sort of thing. It's sad that from her films, we don't really get to know much about her. When you see films with some other actors, you can sense something about them. You know, in musicals, you can sense something about Judy Garland and her vulnerability and the way she performs. You can sense something about the joie de vivre and versatility of Betty Grable from the way she performs. You can learn something about the emotional fragility and sensitivity of Alice Faye from the way she kind of holds back a little bit. And you learn these little things about them, but you don't really learn very much about Carmen Miranda behind the makeup and the flashing eyes and all that. All you learn is that she loved to perform and does it with great vigor and great joy that she shares. But that's about all you learn about her. And I'd like to have learned more about her.
O que é que a baiana tem?
O que é que a baiana tem?
Tom Jobim had this saying that success in Brazil is seen almost like a personal insult. And particularly when somebody becomes successful and famous internationally, it can carry that kind of effect.
Brazilians and Americans, they see Carmen Miranda differently. You know more of the history of Carmen Miranda there.
Carmen Miranda was revolutionary in Brazilian music.
E tem graça como ninguém.
When you look at this remarkable success Carmen Miranda had when she came to America, it is important to look backwards and see where she came from. Because before she was a major star in this country, she was a major star in a totally different way in Brazil.
Maria do Carmo Miranda da Cunha was born in Aliviada, which is in Portugal, in the year 1909, when Portugal was a kingdom.
When she was a baby, her family brought her to Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, and she was raised there with several siblings. One of her younger sisters, Aurora, became quite a well-known performer as well.
Carmen grew up on the streets of Rio, from a working class background in the heart of downtown Rio,
where the father now had established himself as a barber.
Her family was rather poor, very hardworking but poor.
They could rent a small place
right next to the port, literally a stone's throw from the port of Rio de Janeiro.
And there the mother started cooking food. The food was served in her kitchen to men who worked in the neighborhood, and some of those men were composers, some of them were bank clerks, you know.
So she's very familiar with this highly mixed world of dock workers, porters, the kinds of people who carry things through the streets of Rio de Janeiro.
There were people who brought a certain amount of information that was later useful to Carmen, because that opened the doors to her singing career.
Carmen Miranda was a natural singer.
She loved to perform. It's like we all have somebody in our family. Well, that kid stopped running around and making faces. That's who she was.
And it was in that area where she came in contact with the African element, people playing what eventually would be recognized as samba.
Samba is something that brings everybody together. So samba is Brazilian identity encapsulated in music and dance.
The soul of the Brazilians is in the samba.
It's a rhythm, it's a 2/4 rhythm. Dum, da-dum, da-dum. And it's also a style of playing other percussion instruments along with the basic bass drum.
Samba is the meeting point of many traditions.
Well, samba has deep roots, centuries old, in the combination of West African and European influences in Brazil.
Millions of African slaves came into Brazil, primarily in Bahia.
As people moved south, southeast, like the city of Rio de Janeiro, it became an urban samba.
And beginning in the 1920s, Brazilians were struggling to find their own identity.
Middle class, upper middle class, they revered things that were white, that were European, Italian opera, certainly not samba.
It's important to remember that slavery does not end in Brazil until 1888. So there are still former slaves living in Rio de Janeiro in the 1930s. There are many of them. To a certain extent, these are people that Carmen Miranda is growing up with, that she's very familiar with from the working class world of Rio de Janeiro. So a lot of the remaining social disdain that elites are expressing towards popular Brazilian classes is very much tied directly to the remnants of slavery, to the legacy of slavery.
Samba was primarily a black art form.
Originally, it came from the slums, and it conquered the streets during Carnival. You know, Carnival is the Carnaval, is the annual celebration, goodbye to the flesh, where you dance and sing for beginning on Saturday until Ash Wednesday.
Car parades, people dress up and open, you have their convertibles and go down the streets and all dressed up, and people would throw confetti and water. So that's the beginning of Carnival.
When samba became the official accepted music for Carnival, then it had conquered the society, it had conquered everything.
So samba is going through a very rapid period of transformation and broadening of its possibilities, really, in the 1920s and early 1930s, when Carmen Miranda is growing up in Rio, and then when she's breaking into radio in the early 1930s.
At this time, recording companies were developing in Rio, the radio stations were developing, and that really helped to foster a spread of samba as a national music.
At the same time, this group of men who were coming to her mother's kitchen to have their meals began to take notice of her. And at the same time, she continued singing. And there were composers, and one of them introduced her to a very famous composer then, Josué de Barros. He had done a lot to introduce Europe to Brazilian popular music. But instead of wanting that to appear on his epitaph, he always said that it should be said, "I discover Carmen Miranda."
He took her to Brunswick and then to the RCA label and had her recorded.
He began to rehearse her and took her to the radio.
Radio became extremely popular throughout the country, and it's a huge country, so it was one way to keep everybody together was that people everywhere could listen to the radio.
Carmen Miranda was the first artist to sign a contract with a radio station in Brazil.
And the first time that Carmen appeared in the radio was when she was 20 years old. And this program was announced, and the name that appeared in print was Carmen Miranda. When the opera Carmen became very famous, people began to use the name Carmen for her too. And Miranda was the mother's last name. So it wasn't much of a stretch going from Maria do Carmo, Miranda da Cunha, to Carmen Miranda. But with that name came a change in her personality. She became more businesslike, she became more intent in earning fame and fortune, of course. Carmen Miranda did not get any support from the father. You were practically a public woman if you were a radio singer. In a way, the death of her father liberated her, but created another needs. That's a little bit the time when the Bando da Lua appears.
And when you think of Carmen Miranda, you have the image and you have the voice. If you think in terms of radio, I think it's the energy that she was able to transmit in the choice of songs that matched perfectly with her personality and what she needed. And obviously she was very keen in choosing the musicians who played with her. O Bando da Lua, the phenomenal musicians.
When the Bando da Lua began to accompany Carmen, it gave her certain stability. She was no doubt very, very instrumental in making samba a household need in Brazil, her sambas, because she sang them different from the other women. There were other women. None of them came even close to Carmen Miranda.
A percussion player playing samba on the tambourine, for example, which is a small hand drum that makes a kind of rat-tat-tat sound, will play with the beat and will accent the beat and say taka-ta-taka-ta-taka-ta-taka-ta-taka. Carmen Miranda does that with her vocals. She sings the rhythm of samba, and in particular she sings a rhythmic accentuation of samba. So rather than just singing the taka-ta-taka-ta-taka-ta-taka-ta-taka-ta-taka that would be the regular rhythm of samba, she'll start with that and then play with it and play around with it, drawing on every hard percussive syllable in the lyrics that she's offered and accenting those in a way that swings with the beat.
She made a connection. She wasn't just giving a recital. She was reaching out. She was touching people with her music, with her lyrics. And even though she wasn't writing them, the way she interpreted them could convey often more than one meanings. A lot of times the lyrics had verbal jabs in them, or they had double meanings. I mean, in some ways she was like Shakespeare. If you understood it on the levels that it was conveyed, you got more out of the song. I mean, she could be saying something, but she could also be saying something else. In the 1930s, via a revolution, Getúlio Vargas's regime came into power in Brazil.
And with him came the need to emphasize everything that was Brazilian.
One of the things that he did was to encourage popular culture in Brazil, which included popular music.
This idea of samba as our national music, and his approach, or the approach that was put forth by his regime, was that this is what gives us our significance. This is why we're so special.
By the time we come to the end of the 30s, it is now not acceptable to disdain Afro-Brazilian cultural inheritance.
She went from performing live in shows and with her sister, and started making recordings and then made films in Brazil.
Carmen was preparing to appear in a film. It was the last of the 6 films that Carmen Miranda made in Rio.
And what's important about that movie, Banana da Terra, the banana of our land, is that the costume she wears is part of a scene that features the debut of a Dorival Caymmi composition, O Que a Baiana Tem?
O Que a Baiana Tem?
O que a Baiana Tem?
The title is, What Does the Bahian Woman Have?
What is it that the Bahian woman has that is one of the great compositions in Brazilian popular music? It's incredibly catchy. It's got this very vibrant refrain to it.
Dorival Caymmi wrote beautiful melodies, beautiful harmonies, and songs about the sea, the songs about the way Brazilians live and think and hope.
O Que a Baiana Tem is a descriptive song. It was perfect for a film, because Carmen would point at her necklaces and say, the Baiana has balangandais, my earrings, my skirt. And since the song was about Bahian women, Carmen would have to wear a Bahian costume.
Before she started performing with as the Baiana, she would have been in more refined attire, more along the lines of the lyric singers that came before her in a European mode, but certainly not the Bahian outfit that came to be associated with the Brazilian outfit.
The costume, that costume, was very well known. It was worn by black women from Bahia, but no decent woman would wear that.
We're dealing with a strong legacy of slavery and racial discrimination.
They are of African American descent. They're from the slaves, so they were looked down upon. The higher class people of Brazil thought that they were lower class people. They were ladies who sat on doorsteps, cooked food, and sold it. And she was so interested in what they were wearing.
Because these women would carry fruits, goods, foods that they prepared, and they would carry them on their heads.
One of her first jobs when she left school was working for a milliner.
Carmen Miranda worked in a hat shop when she was a teenager.
Her friends would buy the materials and Carmen would imitate the hats that the milliner was selling that had come from Paris. She would imitate them for her friends. The Bahian costume is mostly white, puffed skirts, a turban on the head, and that same costume was always worn for the carnival parades.
Carnival also is related to, of course, costumes, this fantasy.
They have different sections, and one section in the parade is always the Baianas.
What Carmen did is she took that image and completely transformed it.
She wore a flare skirt, bare midriff, the fruit on the head, on the turban.
She took the turban, except she made it higher and she stuck fruit on it.
Yards of beads and bracelets.
Jewelry from the African slaves and big earrings.
And the platform shoes, of course.
And put it all together. So she has created an image that most of us, should we see it, we'd think, oh, that's what they look like in Carnival in Brazil. No, that's not. That's only what Carmen Miranda looks like.
Carmen Miranda was the most famous, the best regarded samba performer in Brazil in 1939.
At that time, she was famous enough that Lee Schubert of New York had heard about her.
At the turn of the 20th century, the brothers Lee, Sam, and J.J. Schubert created a corporation for production and ownership of theaters that became the largest in the United States. And they have been consistently having wonderful, successful musicals and consistently introducing what they called continental artists. By that they meant foreign artists.
This was a woman that the international theatrical community had heard about.
As it was becoming clear that we were going to war and it was going to take place in Europe, there was a tremendous need to feel that this side of the Atlantic Ocean was a large family. The United States began to recognize the reality that South and Central America and Mexico were sitting there as our neighbors.
Getúlio Vargas was much inclined with Italy and all that. The United States didn't want a country like Brazil going that way. I think they did that for the whole Latin America, to kind of get closer to Latin America.
Well, Vargas was pragmatic. I'd have to say that he was courting Hitler at the same time he was courting Roosevelt, and it just turned out that the United States would be a more viable trading partner.
Carmen had some sort of a social relationship with President Vargas, and when Schubert is taking Carmen Miranda, the most famous female white artist out of Brazil, to Broadway, it is obvious that for all Brazilians, not just for President Vargas, this gives exposure to Brazil. For Vargas, it was certainly an opportunity for him to publicize the existence of Brazil. When Schubert sees Carmen Miranda, he's looking for something unique, something exciting.
Schubert knew what he was after. Schubert was a very calculating person.
He was always looked at as kind of a hard-nosed businessman with no appreciation of culture, and yet he opened the door for Carmen Miranda to come to the United States, which speaks very highly of him.
So he arrived in Rio and he went to see Carmen Miranda, who was singing at the Casino da Urca, and immediately he fell in love with her and decided, well, I'm taking her to New York.
She was smart enough to know she's not going to get a bunch of American guys to pretend that they know Brazilian samba. So that was one of the stipulations in her contract with Schubert, to have the band accompany her. And they went through a whole thing because the New York Musicians Union was not happy about that. What, to bring, 6 guys from Brazil? We got some New York musicians not working. Finally, luckily, the New York World's Fair was about to open. So there was a lot of diplomatic relationships and discussions going on back and forth between the Brazilian embassy and the American embassy. And it was one of the band members that actually said, hey, why don't you try to get us in on a contract with the World's Fair? We will perform there, but then also one of our other 7 other shows we do every night, we'll do Streets of Paris.
When they came to the United States, Aloisio was very important because he was not only the conductor of her orchestra, but he was acting as secretary and translator and family. Carmen had always lived with her family, brothers and sisters, mother.
Aloisio Oliveira was very close to Carmen Miranda. Some people say they were like boyfriend, girlfriend at one point, and I can see that because Aloisio was a fantastic mind. He was a prince. Carmen, lovely and beautiful, and she missed Brazil so much.
Streets of Paris turned the Baiana into the international Baiana, and Hollywood turned the international Baiana into this fantastic thing. You see it and you can never forget. That's the beginning, of Carmen icon, of Carmen larger than life.
Lee Schubert wants to get Carmen into movies because as the person who's making 50% of the money from her, he knows there's good money for Carmen in the film industry. 20th Century Fox is the first studio that makes a concerted effort to try to bring Carmen Miranda to screen. In the summer of 1939, Darryl F. Zanuck begins trying to develop a film that will feature Carmen Miranda. To get Carmen Miranda to appear in Down Argentine Way, what Darryl F. Zanuck had to do was rent soundstage space in New York. He shot her musical numbers and had her musical numbers shot totally separately from any of the actors. You never see her in a shot with Betty Grable or Don Amici. Carmen Miranda appears totally by herself as a specialty act, but she is billed as one of the major stars of Down Argentine Way. And she was a major star in America at this time. There was a great desire to see her. People were reading press accounts of her exotic beauty. And Carmen's competitive nature, her inner drive to be a perfectionist at anything that any challenge that was put her way, pushed her very hard while she was in New York. She was appearing nightly in a Broadway show. She had a floor show that was happening at the Waldorf Astoria, and during the daytime they were shooting these musical numbers. It was a punishing schedule. Carmen was driving herself very, very hard.
I don't think she was very good at taking care of herself. At some point, her health began to fail.
And she collapsed during the middle of shooting one day of Down Argentine Way. It was the first warning shot across the bow of how her health would suffer from her drive to be the best artist she could possibly be.
Brazilians who leave Brazil become highly successful abroad. There's nothing like returning home and being well received.
Carmen, when she went back in 1940, she had to say thank you to Vargas. And the way to say thank you was to appear in a fundraising that Vargas's wife had organized. And this fundraising was to take place at the Casino da Urca, the same place where Schubert had discovered her.
So when she goes back, she's confronting an audience that is a little bit leery of the fact that, okay, now you're a big international star and you're separated from your roots.
When she went back and performed at Casino da Urca, the audience wasn't her audience, actually. I think talking about the upper crust of Rio de Janeiro, kind of disconnected.
She, in a very rare and uncharacteristic move, came out and said the wrong thing, greeted the audience in English, and was seeming to play up her Hollywood stardom instead of her carioca roots. And that turned out to be a miscue.
So after saying good evening people, she decided to sing the South American way. And that was not samba. That was not what Carmen was supposed to sing. Again, no clapping, nothing. And she retired to her dressing room and began to cry and felt sick and couldn't finish the evening.
There was this feeling that Carmen Miranda became Americanized.
Her reaction to that is totally brilliant. She goes back and works with popular composers on this tune, Disseram que voltei americanizada. They said that I came back Americanized, which is one of the most charming and syncopated and swinging sambas that you'll ever hope to hear, that, typical of Carmen Miranda's career, plays with bilingual puns and with bicultural mastery.
And in that song, she celebrates, all the misgivings that she has and the audience had. And it's very funny. And people laughed, and there was a reconciliation there. But at that point, she had been in contact with Schubert. Schubert was desperately trying to bring her back, and she turned her back and went back to New York. She spent 14 years in the United States before coming back. She always resented that. She always thought that there was still some resentment there.
Give me a bandana, bandana.
If any performer can have the legacy of making the whole world feel better, Carmen Miranda is ennobled by the fact that her whole career is dedicated to making her audiences everywhere in the whole world feel better.
I don't care for a hoochie coochie and I don't like the shimmy.
It's her way, a radiant way of being. I think that's what attracted people to Carmen, and because she was coming from a different culture, it was so contrasting to American culture that was obvious that she was so different, and people felt immensely attracted to that. It's like a light, that happiness. I think happiness with Carmen Miranda was a main thing. I think she projected that. She gave away the feeling of happiness and to be positive and fun. I think that's how she became also successful.
There was a liveliness to her. She was the kind of person that if you walked into a room crowded with people, you would try and get over in her circle.
It was how she performed. She was fun, she was playful, and Carmen Miranda knew how to engage her audience.
She, in some ways, was sort of a creature from outer space. She came here, she conquered Hollywood. Her life, in some ways, reads a little bit like a soap opera.
20th Century Fox was a studio that, among other studios who were very concerned about the money situation during World War II, the foreign markets, particularly England, big foreign market, Europe and the Far East were closed. So they knew that they had to make overtures to this Central and South American market as never before.
Fox was part of a group of studios that were trying to help with the policy that President Roosevelt established, the Good Neighbor policy. And they also wanted to attract the attention of the countries, especially Brazil and Argentina. towards the position of the United States for the Allies and against the Axis.
Now here, waiting for them, is this star of Brazilian radio and Brazilian records, the top star in the 30s.
She made about 300 recordings in Portuguese in Brazil and made 6 movies and was an enormous national favorite, so much so that she was frequently invited to tour to other neighboring South American countries as an exemplar of Brazilian performing styles.
Fox musical was something that the story wasn't very tight and they could always plop in specialty acts.
Carmen Miranda.
Well, here's this act that was a sensation on the Broadway stage, a sensation at the Waldorf Astoria. Let's film it. Carmen and her Brazilian band, let's film it. And they were able to plop that into a Betty Grable film, Down Argentine Way.
The audience in the United States saw Carmen Miranda as South America. This is what people in South America look like. They act crazy. They wear these wacky outfits. Their eyes are always, and they're making these silly gestures. It was entertaining. Again, though, reflected poorly in the long term on Brazil.
Carmen Miranda, when she finished her run in Streets of Paris with the touring company, she traveled to Hollywood because Lee Schubert had her booked in her next film, which was That Night in Rio, set in her hometown of Rio de Janeiro. Of course, she never travels to Rio. Everything is shot on the Hollywood backlot. And because her English skills were very low at the time, Darryl F. Zanuck worked with the writers to try to figure out a way to make Carmen a character within the film. And by doing this, what they did is they took Carmen's dialogue, and they largely had her speak in Portuguese, and then they calibrated in the writing Don Amici's responses so that you understood what she said.
Basta de mentiras, ouviu? Quem é aquela mulher sentada na mesa da frente?
What woman at what front table? Besides, I never saw her before.
Então por que você estava piscando o olho pra ela?
Oh, that wasn't a hotel lobby smile I was giving her. My smile belongs to my public. She's a customer and she's entitled to a piece of it like every other pretty girl. I mean like every other customer.
É essa mulher com quem você saiu ontem à noite, não é?
I wasn't out with her with anybody else last night. I was home in bed by 12:30.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I gotta get a new mattress.
They let her be the punctuation, and then he would tell the audience the punchline. It would appear that she might be saying one thing, but because they could pretty much count on that none of the American audiences or no significant part of the American audiences would understand Portuguese, that her Portuguese could be used to comic effect. She worked very, very hard to learn that script. And in fact, she would later claim, and it's very difficult to tell if she was joking about this, that although she had read the script, she had memorized the script, she had memorized the English portions of the script, she did not understand it was a comedy.
What she does for the press sometimes is interesting, because she always tries to call attention by being funny. Self-deprecation was one of her weapons, always, always.
Carmen Miranda learned English very fast and very well. She was immensely smart. But, you know, on stage and on films and television, it was cute. You know, people like that.
E tem sido prazer para nós. Agora estou ocupada, não posso. Como eu estava dizendo a você, show nos hospitais e nos campos é muito bom, mas por intermédio do cinema é muito melhor, porque vocês estão pertinho, podem viver muito melhor, é muito mais interessante.
Miss Miranda?
O que é que você quer?
Well, pardon me, but you're talking to Americans, and I think it'd be better if you'd speak English.
Oh, I forgot. Well, fellows, you know, what I'd like to talk to you about is this. I just come back from maternal hospitals and bombs, films, and now here I am, G.A. fellows, talk to you, and Halifax, and Scuttlebutts, and this make more than you think happy. Good?
Well, I still think it'd be better if you'd speak English. Look, it's a simple thing. Mousetrap to the foreigner scram. And the middle gate to the chorus France like that, and the guys, they love it that way. And your foreign scam to the Pfeffernacht like that, and first thing you know, you're kicking a couple of songs around.
Oh, that's what I thought you said. What did you say?
Mellowscraft and the foreigner scram. It's a simple thing, and the guys there, they love to sing the songs and prosecutors like that, and first thing you know, you got a couple of songs to me, you simply tell them what you think about them and how you feel about them. And if you need me, I'll be right over there. See?
Goodbye. Well, fellas, you know how I feel about you. Oh, well, I like you very much. I think you're grand. Why, you see that when I feel your touch, my heart starts to beat the band. I like you to hold me tight. You are too divine. If you want to be in someone's arms tonight, just be sure the arms you're in are mine. Oh, I like your lips, and I love your eyes. Would you like my hips? Two hips, not thighs. You see them on.
On that night in Rio, there are extensive story notes with Darryl F. Zanuck. And in these story notes, he starts trying to define Carmen Miranda's on-screen persona. One of his story notes is that it's a sequence that the writers had devised during one of the drafts where some action would be going on while Carmen Miranda is singing one of her numbers. And he wrote emphatically, once Carmen Miranda begins singing, you cannot cut away from her. He knew that this was her great strength.
I like you very much. I think you're grand. Why is it that when I feel your touch, my heart starts to beat a band?
The first time I met her, all I saw was the door bolt open, and in came this little lady with this huge big smile and a very strange hat on her head full of feathers. She impressed me so much because I was used to seeing so many beautiful women, even at that age, on the 20th lot. And she wasn't beautiful, but she was striking. And what I liked about her the most was that she was just very interested, not like you treat a child. She talked to me and I said I was learning the costume and designs. And she then told me that she had been, at 14 in Brazil, she had her first job. And she started working in a boutique, and then she started making these hats. And actually, I guess that was one of her famous hats. And that's how I first saw her. Carmen, you just loved her from the moment that she talked to you, because she talked to you.
By early 1941, 20th Century Fox was ready for Carmen Miranda to star in her third film for the studio. Weekend in Havana is the eventual name of the film that would come out of this. The character that was to be played by Carmen Miranda was included in the initial script that was written on Weekend in Havana. Darryl F. Zanuck did not like the role that was written for Carmen Miranda at all, and his story notes in early 1941 reveal a great deal about how he saw Carmen Miranda's character appearing on screen. Zanuck writes, Miranda's role is a walk-on. She now has absolutely no part in the picture. She seems to clutter it up more than anything else. We will make her a nightclub singer, the star attraction at one of the Havana nightclubs. Cesar Romero is Carmen's manager, handles all her money. Romero has a passion for gambling. He bets on dog races, lotteries, etc., continually using Miranda's money for this purpose and making up all kinds of excuses to account for where the money went. Miranda's continual query is, "Where is my money?" Now, even in the story notes, this is written out phonetically, which is the way the press would write out Carmen Miranda's quotes.
She was a professional foreigner. If she suddenly had become Americanized, her differentness, her lure might have been, or the studios feared, that might not be as big, because then she's one of us. She always was one of us.
She doesn't speak with too much of an accent at all. It's an affectation that she uses to maintain her persona in America.
The comedy scenes that she did, and they were specifically, I think, probably inserted into a screenplay. This love thing's gone on too long, will she or won't she? Send in the bombshell. And in she'd come. And some of them work better than others, especially when she's working with consummate artists like Edward Everett Horton, you know, and Charlotte Greenwood, for instance. She was locked in to being a character. Her scenes were only so long, and then she'd wave her hanky and do her kicks. So there were lots of people at that time that were not allowed to explore all of the things that they did. It's just that Carmen did it better than anybody else and laughed all the way to the bank, I hope.
Daryl F. Zanuck comes up with a keynote in defining Carmen Miranda's on-screen persona. Go over Carmen Miranda's dialogue and make her speeches shorter. Give her words to mispronounce, and also have her use the wrong word occasionally.
This has nothing to do with your double-crossing, yes?
Oh, yes. Oh, no. Oh, no, I'm afraid we know each other.
What you are afraid from? What you doing with McTavish? Where did you find him?
Oh, out there.
Yeah, put him back. He's mine. We are going steadily.
Really, this is most embarrassing. Embarrassing.
Why don't you hang a sign around his neck, private property?
I'll hang a rope around his neck and maybe I pull it.
Oh, impulsive. Impulsive.
Repulsive. Do you think she'll look any gooder?
I would say that in Brazil, there's still a certain sense of ambivalence regarding Carmen Miranda's film roles in Hollywood. That yes, there's an affection for Carmen, but there's still a cringe factor that Brazilians will see these and say, oh, we're not really like this, why are we depicted in this way? And that Americans seeing these films will not have that.
I hope you don't mind dancing so close. I think it's so much cozier.
But when you dance a rumba, she's not supposed to be cozy.
Look out, kid, he's got you.
I show you how to rumba. Follow me. Like this. See? You see? That's it. This is not the rumba. I know.
It is now.
It's okay by me, big boys.
She was not naive. She was not naive, especially at that point. I think when she arrived in New York, she might have been. But then after dealing with the Schuberts, after dealing with Zanuck in Hollywood, she was not naive.
Around this time, Carmen gives an interview. And she says during the course of the interview that she hopes someday she can convince Hollywood to make a film about the real Brazil, about real Brazilian music, the real Rio de Janeiro, rather than this sort of mythic dream vision of it that is being presented by Hollywood. And it is this is like the last time you'll hear a quote like this from Carmen.
And I think she was serious, very serious, when she said, I want a film about the real Brazil made. And I want to work on that. And she brought composers to Hollywood and introduced them to the studios so they could, know what kind of music they could expect if they did something about the real Brazil. But of course, Hollywood would want, their own composers doing whatever adaptations they wanted to make on sambas and rumbas and congas.
Maybe the first time she wondered why she was in a movie called Down Argentine Way, but then after that she realized that's the system, I'm the brand, put me in it.
Another reason she fit so well in the Fox musical is that the musical usually has two pair of players. This came from the stage. There was the straight couple, the romantic couple, and of course they had songs and numbers, and they needed time off because it's strenuous, the musical. And so to give them time off, the musical, as it was evolving, always had a comic couple, a foil. She was perfect now. Now she was a character. In That Night in Rio and Weekend in Havana, she was the comic foil to Alice Faye, who's very straight and very lovely and very nice and very prim and very proper. And here is someone who is not so refined and not so cool, who is hot. So hot with cool, this is great. And of course then Betty Grable, who was in Down Argentine Way, is making her way up the ladder. The next film, Springtime in the Rockies, where she is again the comic foil.
Is that a diamond?
Yes. Does the size of it startle you?
Yes, in Brazil we throw that kind away. We dig them up this big.
Don't change the subject.
Then we have The Gangs All Here.
One film that really stands out for me is The Gangs All Here, the Busby Berkeley film. It is surrealistic. It's psychedelic. The choreography is the Technicolor. It's amazing.
The opening number is a great introduction of her, and judging from how she's so featured, we see her before we see anybody else in the film and any of the rest of the stars.
In this opening number, we are introduced to Carmen Miranda, who would wear these hats that would have little sort of miniature fruit basket on there. And this hat is introduced as this massive, giant load of fruit that's being lowered down from a ship and appears to be growing actually out of Carmen Miranda's head. And Carmen Miranda begins by singing the wonderful, haunting song Brazil in her own inimitable way, but she is so much presenting. She is so much, I am here and look at me, and the camera focuses in on her. You know, in musicals at this time, it was very rare you had a close-up. But Busby Berkeley would give close-ups to Carmen Miranda. She is the only leading lady in a musical that Busby Berkeley, in one of his elaborate numbers that would take place with these military precisions, Carmen Miranda is the only woman that he ever takes and singles out and focuses in on and presents in a way that she is something remarkable and special and can be at the centerpiece of these elaborate geometric dance numbers, musical numbers that he would stage.
I think if you were creating a little box with a piece of film in it, and this was going to be the strip that represented Carmen Miranda for posterity, you would certainly want the Busby Berkeley number, The Girl in the Tutti Frutti Hat.
I wonder why does everybody look at me and then begin to talk about the Christmas tree. I hope that means that everyone is glad to see the lady in the Tutti Frutti hat. The gentlemen, they want to make me say, see, but I don't tell them that, I tell them yes, sirree. And maybe that is why they come for dates to me, the lady in the Tutti Frutti hat.
It combines everything. It combines the funny sound of Tutti Frutti. It combines the extraordinary indulgence with color and with style for Busby Berkeley himself, but it also combines it all with the singular performing personality of Carmen Miranda.
Aye, they have a different kind of time, and even I forget that I'm the lady in the Tutti Frutti hat.
Carmen Miranda, for many in the United States, is the hat. If you go to a costume party and you wear a silly hat, you're Carmen Miranda.
There's a degree to which the role that Carmen Miranda plays in successive Hollywood films is repetitive and confining. But I don't think that she ever becomes just the hat or the headdress or the turban. And that's because she's such an amazing performer that she's always bringing a range and a vitality to what becomes a very stereotypical role.
Her whole performance style, her flashing eyes, her outfit, her look. She did what Charlie Chaplin did when he created the Little Tramp's outfit, or what Fred Astaire did when he took top hat, white tie, and tails. That is the last thing that a internationally known celebrity can do, to make a brand. You could caricature it, you can draw it. There's a whole silhouette. And Carmen instinctively knew that she needed to do that.
For Carmen to move to Los Angeles and become part of the Hollywood thing, you know, the scene, I think it's hard. It was hard because Hollywood is a machine. They direct things in ways that sometimes artists don't want to.
They never gave Carmen Miranda much space beyond the movies that she made, where she was dancing, singing, and cha-cha-cha, you know, sambaing around. And I would imagine a lot of that happened because the war was over in 1945, and by the time things began to settle down, I think people were through with those kind of movies. We were now moving on to other kinds of movies, and she really was not a dramatic star in that sense. She was so pigeonholed as Carmen Miranda, you know, with the bananas on the head and the high heels and the singing and dancing and all of that, that it was very hard to put anything else.
Unfortunately, Fox put its money elsewhere, and Technicolor especially during the war, was really costly. And for Carmen to go into black and white looks like a bad dub of what was the, you know, we should have had colorization in those days, so afterwards they could have gone back in and done it. Yeah, it's indicative of how the genre was being perceived by Fox. It wasn't Carmen. Everybody was in black and white suddenly.
When Carmen was doing her nightclub tours in the 1950s, she created a new identity for herself, a Make My Business with Bananas. She was trying to create this as a signature song. And during the nightclub routine, she would take off her headdress. She would reveal a little bit about herself during this. And it was a way of trying to take off the mask and to try to present herself as a more genuine performer, much more so like she had been in Brazil, but she couldn't strip it all away. She could never get away from the headdress, from the hat, from the Biana that had been such a defining moment culturally in its own way in Brazil, but became a caricature in the United States.
Darryl Zanuck loved Americana. He loved the American past. And he loved to make pictures about the American past. We have this with Greenwich Village, this 1922 it's set in. And notice how they talk about this, the Cicerone on the bus says, this is the Latin Quarter of New York City, where all the, you know, the artists and strange, the exotic people are. That's like an introduction to Carmen Miranda. Well, actually, the film is on her shoulders. And of course, we go into Danny's Den, and here she is, the first number, and she's the fortune teller, too.
Now, Greenwich Village is also the film in which Carmen Miranda sings one of her signature songs from Brazil.
In the finale of this movie, she is performing with all of the chorus girls, and suddenly she breaks into O que é que a baiana tem? What is it that the girl from Bahia has? Which is the song that she sang when she first put on the baiana costume back in Brazil to film Banana da Terra.
Any band that is handy can make me feel dandy. I don't need a brandy for kicks. Aha. Give me a rhythm that's Latin, and I'll show Manhattan. My South American drink, samba. O que é que a baiana tem? Tem torso de seda, tem corrente de ouro, tem pata rendada, tem saia engomada, tem sandália enfeitada, tem e tem graça como ninguém.
In this song, which is about the outfit that she made famous, the Biana, she sings it and she's not wearing the costume. It's absolutely remarkable to see that she has been stripped of all of her attachment to Brazil whatsoever for this closing number where she does this medley, and in the middle of the medley she pops in one of her great signature musical numbers, and it's devoid of any sense of context in this film. It's the wrong period, it's the wrong costume, it's the wrong everything that seemed to make this song so beautiful and remarkable, a song that really shaped who we think of as Carmen Miranda. And it's done in a very different way, an odd way in this film.
It's very difficult if you're trying to tell a story, a plot, to have as a central character someone who is speaking in an exotic language and whose image is by its very nature exotic, and that's the whole point of the image. And so it was never possible, right from the beginning, for Carmen Miranda to be the central character of any film in which she appeared. So the ironic nature of the contract that she had with 20th Century Fox is that she is billed as a star because she was very appealing and very popular, but she never could carry a picture. She was always like the spice in the stew. So she was everybody's best friend or everybody's confidant, and basically she was there so that every once in a while she could do one of her musical numbers and erupt in movement and color and provide exactly what the audience has expected of her. It was a self-defeating problem that never could be solved properly, because after a certain amount of time that character became too repetitious. You saw it too often, and where could it go?
The war was a wonderful excuse for these movies, and once this excuse disappeared, what can we do with Carmen? One that really affected Carmen's screen persona was when they decided not to use Technicolor for her films. Carmen could look very nice, you know, in black and white, but it was not the same thing. It was not what audiences expected. Tropicalism had to come in Technicolor. There was no other way. Fox was not interested in investing that much money in films where Carmen Miranda would appear.
I can imagine what it would be for an incredible, successful woman like Carmen Miranda living in the United States. She wasn't married for a long time, highly paid, incredibly successful. I think so much love, somebody who could give a lot of love and would like to receive a lot of love as well. And can you imagine working all the time, so very hard.
Her quest in life was to overcome poverty. I mean, they left Portugal, they changed country, they, you know, that was not enough. Carmen began using drugs when she came to the United States because she was working so hard. She needed at some point to rest, and she began taking sleeping pills, and the sleeping pills got stronger and stronger and stronger with time, and then she needed to get up and work, and so she needed something to wake her up.
After her Fox contract was concluded with If I'm Lucky, Carmen Miranda made a film for United Artists called Copacabana. She was teamed with Groucho Marx. It's in black and white, and one wants color.
I think it's actually perhaps the worst film that she made. But that film produced something and that changed Carmen's life. Carmen would very much have liked to have been Aloysius' wife. But it was he who didn't want to be Mr. Miranda. So he refused to marry Carmen, and so the relationship was always this confusion of brotherly love and husbandly love, and I want to escape this situation, and Carmen wanted, you know, to hold on to him and possess him completely. And of course that didn't make Aloysius happy. And then when the separation happened, which had to happen because he decided to marry somebody else, Carmen suffered enormously. And was her meeting David Sebastian. He was the brother of one of the, not producers, but he had given money to make the film Copacabana. He was an investor. And David Sebastian got very attached to Carmen, would follow her, would be with her all the time. And several months later, they ended up getting married, something that nobody really could explain. It was the moment when Carmen was very weak. She had left Fox, which had been a solid world for her before. She had entered a world that was shaky. She was trying to do different things, and she had no manager. Aloysius had disappeared. So there was a need there. The problem was that the person who filled that need was the wrong person. David was supposed to be the manager. David was supposed to take charge of her career. David had no talent for that. He made bad investments. He made bad choices for Carmen. He forced Carmen to work, to overwork, and he had no sensibility towards her needs.
We all felt that it was going to be a happier experience when she went to Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, and she did A Date with Judy in 1948, and then Nancy Goes to Rio in 1950 in Technicolor. But clearly, again, they didn't know what to do with her. She's playing the same character with the same costumes and the same fractured English, and they tried to give her a little more to do, but she no longer was the star of those films. And then the last, I think, rather ignominious appearance of her on film is in black and white in Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis's 1953 film Scared Stiff. Up to that time, or around that time, she was doing a great deal of nightclub work.
So there was no knowledge regarding the effects of these drugs that she was taking. And she took them constantly to gain, if she gained weight, she would take drugs to diet and to lose weight. Whatever she needed to be more energetic when she was dancing. Remember that she was dancing with those platform shoes, with the heavy costume, with all the jewelry, with the headgear that was always heavy. So she needed lots of stamina when she was working. And it reached a point when she had a breakdown, a very serious mental breakdown, and was desperate, and the only way to get her back to some semblance of mental health was to give her electric shock treatment.
After her film career is not as booked as it had been before, she goes into live performance. She goes to London Palladium, she appears in Las Vegas, she does benefits, she did a lot of radio shows and was doing early television. She still was trying to sort out what Brazil meant to her.
Nobody knew what to do with her. So at that point, Aloisio was back, and he called Aurora and told her what the situation was, and Aurora came to Los Angeles and packed everything and took Carmen back to Brazil. And it's very sad because she was practically taken as a doll to the airplane. She was not responding to anything. But during the flight, somehow she recovered, she put her makeup on and she landed. And there she was, Carmen Miranda, with her smile and saying hello to everybody. When she arrived in Rio, she went directly to the Copacabana Palace, and the doctor put a sign on the door, no visitors allowed, and she was there cleaning. I mean, it was deep cleaning of her system, which must have been absolutely cruel because, you know, she had been taking all those drugs for years and years, and then suddenly everything was taken, and she had to be reborn. Back in Los Angeles, Sebastian wanted his wife back because there were contracts, because there was the possibility of a television program, because there was an invitation to go to Cuba, an invitation to Las Vegas, always the usual places where Carmen used to sing. She made a terrible decision of going back to the United States. I think she thought that she could restart her marriage. And so she went back, and everybody was very happy, and she began to do the tours. She went to Cuba and appeared at the Tropicana. During intermission between one song or another, she would go to the dressing room and be all covered with sweat and thirsty and weak. But again, when she had to go back to the stage, she would, you know, perform as usual.
She worked herself into the grave, actually. She loved what she was doing, but her heart just couldn't stand up. She'd been in Cuba, she was doing the Jimmy Durante show. She was all over the place because that's how she was. She lived for her work. I guess just her end was the way she probably wanted to go, although I think she would have probably wanted to last longer. And I thought, you know, she was always smiling. That's what I liked about her. She was always smiling, and always her hands were always moving. But I wondered if she really was as happy as she looked. I've always thought that, because in a way she was a loner too.
I remember her appearance on the Jimmy Durante show, which was so tragic. They were shooting a samba finale with Jimmy Durante dancing with Carmen Miranda. And while dancing with Jimmy Durante, she has a heart attack and falls to her knees.
Wait a minute, stop the music. Stop the music.
Yeah, a wonderful idea. I'm out of breath.
And then, like a real trooper, continues the number.
Wait, I'll take your lines. All right, come here, boys. All right, come over here, boys.
As she's walking out, she waves goodbye. Little did anyone know what that meant. She went home, apparently stayed up quite late that night, and had a fatal heart attack that very night. This is a woman who will die within 12 hours, and you see her dancing in costume. Very, very, very sad. And yet, the fact that she goes on right before your eyes shows that indomitable spirit that we all love so much about her.
I was leaving for Mexico when I heard that she had died, and that was in 1955. And my gosh, 46 years, she was that, you know, young.
Immediately after her death, all the rancor that Doña Maria, Carmen's mother, had for Sebastian came out, because she came out of the house when she learned that Carmen was dead, shouting, "Sebastian killed Carmen. David killed Carmen."
Now, all the guys and musicians and all that and biographers, they say it wasn't a good match. That took a toll in her life. You know, I think the marriage wasn't well. She was a Catholic, and she would not ask for a divorce. Coming from a Portuguese Catholic family, she would not. And unfortunately, because of hard work and her physical state, she passed away in 1955 in Beverly Hills.
Americans went to see her. There was a long line waiting to see her. The plane where her body was traveling arrived in Rio de Janeiro, and from there, from the airport, the casket was put on a fire engine and taken to the downtown of Brazil, to a public building where she was laid in a state for several days so people could see her. And the whole town came out, close to 1 million people. It was one of those epic burials.
There's nothing deep or profound about the persona of Carmen Miranda. It is what you see. She is just the embodiment of enthusiasm and optimism and color and movement and everything that we all associate with happiness.
It's interesting, everybody has their moment in the sun, and Carmen Miranda had many years in the sun. She was a true force in the international world of entertainment, on stage and on screen, at a time when we were very cautious of those from other countries, and yet she was such a force in this country. And everybody knew who Carmen Miranda was, not just because of the bananas on her head, but because of the entertainment and because of what she, the exuberance in her way of doing things, and that you felt comfortable watching her. You just felt good watching her. When the movies were over, you were happy, you know. It was Carmen Miranda.
To me, it rhymes with lucky when I'm looking into two blue eyes.